Our autistic son committed suicide today, and our other children blame us for mistreating him. Now my daughter has stopped talking to us. My husband and I have had 3 children, James, 27 male, Kate, 23 female, and Stephen, 20 male. When Stephen was 6 years old, he was diagnosed with autism. The diagnosis came as a shock to our family, but we immediately took action to provide him with all the support and accommodations he needed. We researched extensively about autism, consulted with specialists, and enrolled Stephen in various therapies designed to help him develop social, communication, and behavioral skills. Despite our efforts, Stephen resisted from the very beginning. He was adamant that he did not want any special treatment or help. He would often tell us that he wanted to be treated like a normal person and not be singled out because of his condition. We tried to reassure him, explaining that the help we were providing was necessary for him to achieve the same results as other children his age. We encouraged him to accept himself, be proud of who he was, and not to let society's opinions or expectations influence him. Our community was incredibly supportive, with teachers, friends, and family members all doing their best to accommodate Stephen and make him feel included. However, Stephen's perception was different. He felt that by receiving special treatment, he was being treated like a subhuman. He believed he was just as competent as his peers and had been so even before his diagnosis. The interventions, which were meant to support him, felt to him like an indication that he was deficient or incapable. Whenever someone tried to help him, whether it was a teacher offering additional time for tests or a therapist providing strategies to manage social interactions, Stephen would firmly refuse. He would explain that he didn't want or need any help and would often come up with excuses to avoid these interactions. His refusals were consistent and passionate, and no amount of reasoning or reassurance could change his mind. As parents, we were caught in a difficult situation. On one hand, we wanted to respect Stephen's wishes and treat him as he desired. On the other hand, we knew that the support and accommodations were crucial for his development and well-being. This conflict created a strain in our relationship with Stephen, as he became increasingly frustrated with our attempts to help him, and we became more desperate to ensure he received the support he needed. As Stephen grew older, his struggle with his autism diagnosis deepened. His desire to be seen and treated as a normal person intensified, leading him to take drastic measures to distance himself from the label of being autistic. This period marked a significant shift in his behavior and relationships with those around him. In his early years, Stephen had reluctantly tolerated the special accommodations and support provided by his teachers and therapists. However, as he approached adolescence, his resentment towards these interventions grew. He began to isolate himself, withdrawing from social interactions and friendships. He would often come home from school and retreat to his room, spending hours alone, away from the family. He avoided participating in family gatherings and extracurricular activities, preferring solitude over the risk of being perceived as different. The turning point came when Stephen was around 13 years old. He approached us with a request that both broke our hearts and left us conflicted. He wanted to transfer to a different school where no one knew about his autism diagnosis. Stephen believed that by starting fresh in a new environment, he could shed the label that he felt had defined and limited him for so many years. He was convinced that if no one knew about his condition, he would finally be able to live the normal life he had always yearned for. Stephen's plea was desperate and heartfelt. He explained that at his current school, everyone saw him through the lens of his diagnosis. Teachers, despite their good intentions, treated him with a level of caution and pity that made him feel inadequate. His classmates, though generally kind, often kept a distance, likely unsure of how to interact with him without causing offense. This environment, Stephen argued, was stifling his ability to form genuine connections and achieve his full potential. Despite understanding his perspective, we, as his parents, were deeply concerned. We feared that without the support systems in place at his current school, Stephen would struggle even more. The specialized attention, the individualized education plans, and the trained staff were all there to help him succeed. We worried that a new school, unaware of his needs, would not provide the necessary accommodations, leading to greater challenges and setbacks. Moreover, we were afraid that keeping his autism a secret would place an immense amount of pressure on Stephen. The effort to hide such a significant part of his identity could exacerbate his anxiety and depression. We believed that acceptance and self-advocacy were crucial for his long-term well-being, and we hoped that he would eventually see the value in the support we insisted on providing. Our decision to deny his request was met with intense anger and disappointment from Stephen. He felt betrayed and unheard, convinced that we were not considering his feelings or desires. This decision created a rift between us that grew wider with each passing year. Stephen's behavior became more withdrawn, his interactions with us more strained. He began to view our insistence on support as a form of control rather than care, further deepening his sense of isolation and resentment. By the time Stephen reached his early teens, the weight of his unresolved feelings and the ongoing struggle with his autism diagnosis culminated in a severe depression. His once manageable frustrations had grown into a deep and consuming despair. Stephen's mental health deteriorated rapidly, and he became increasingly withdrawn and despondent. The joy and curiosity that once characterized his childhood were replaced by a pervasive sense of hopelessness and isolation. Stephen's depression was exacerbated by his adamant refusal to accept any form of help. By this point, his rejection of support extended beyond his autism. He declined medication and refused to attend therapy sessions, even though these were critical for addressing his mental health. To him, any form of assistance symbolized the special treatment that he so vehemently despised. He believed that accepting help would further cement the perception that he was different and incapable, a notion he was desperate to escape. In his eyes, the root cause of his depression was the special treatment he received because of his autism. Stephen felt that the accommodations and interventions, though well-intentioned, isolated him from his peers, and labeled him as someone who needed constant support. He longed to live a life free from these constraints, to experience a semblance of normalcy that he felt had been denied to him. In a moment of clarity, amidst his turmoil, Stephen proposed a compromise. He offered to seek treatment for his depression if we agreed to let him transfer to a different school where no one knew about his autism. He believed that a fresh start in an environment free from preconceived notions would allow him to live the normal life he craved. This proposal was supported by his siblings, James and Kate, and a few of his teachers, who saw it as a potential path to improvement. However, the idea of Stephen transferring to a new school without any disclosure of his autism filled us with apprehension. We were deeply concerned that without the necessary support systems, Stephen would face even greater challenges. The fear that he might struggle academically and socially without the accommodations he needed weighed heavily on our decision. Despite the encouragement from those around us, we ultimately decided against his request, believing believing it was in his best interest to remain in an environment where he had access to the support he required. Steven's reaction to our decision was one of profound disappointment and anger. He felt unheard and invalidated, convinced that we were prioritizing our fears over his well-being. This decision became a significant point of contention and further strained our already fragile relationship. The situation reached a tragic climax when Steven was 15. The weight of his depression and his feelings of entrapment led him to a point of utter despair. One night he attempted to take his own life by hanging himself. The discovery was a moment of sheer horror and heartbreak for our family. Thankfully, Steven survived the attempt, but the incident left deep emotional scars on all of us. When Steven turned 18, he graduated from high school and was accepted into his dream university. The pride and joy we felt for his achievement were quickly overshadowed by a devastating blow. Steven packed his belongings, moved out, and cut off all contact with my husband and me. It was as if he had been waiting for this moment for years, a chance to break free from what he saw as the chains of our support and care. He maintained contact with his siblings, James and Kate, but for us, he had only anger and bitterness. He left behind an angry goodbye letter, the contents of which still haunt us. In it, he accused us of ruining 12 years of his life. He claimed that our insistence on providing him with special treatment and help had made him feel crazy, stupid, and awkward, someone who needed help for everything. Steven wrote that we were the reason he was still depressed and suicidal. His words were filled with a passion that cut deep into our hearts. "I hate you with a passion," he declared. Steven believed that by leaving, he could finally live a normal life, free from the constant reminders of his autism and the special treatment he had always resisted. He wanted to be seen as competent and capable, not as someone defined by a diagnosis. To him, moving out was a chance to start anew, to redefine himself away from the shadow of our overprotectiveness. We were heartbroken and desperate to reach out to him. We tried calling him, sending letters, and emailing, hoping to mend the rift that had grown between us. But Steven was resolute in his silence. Each attempt to contact him was met with a cold, unyielding wall. It was clear that he was determined to sever ties completely. Our concern for Steven's well-being drove us to visit him at his university. Despite knowing that our presence might be unwelcome, we hoped that seeing us in person might soften his resolve, that he might be willing to talk and perhaps find some common ground. But our visit only seemed to fuel his anger. He refused to engage with us, his demeanor cold and distant. When it became clear that we wouldn't leave, he threatened to get a restraining order. The threat was enough to make us back off, realizing that our presence was causing him more distress than comfort. Since that visit, we have had no direct contact with Steven. Our only glimpses into his life come through James and Kate, who tell us that he seems to be doing better now, despite still struggling with depression. It's a small comfort to know that he's managing, but the pain of his absence and the unresolved conflict between us remains a constant ache. Anyway, today he committed suicide. The words still don't seem real. Our youngest, our Steven, is gone. From what we know, he overdosed on medication. The news came through Kate, who had always been close to her brother. Her voice on the phone was strained, almost breaking. She didn't just bring the news of Steven's death. She brought a torrent of accusations and pain. Kate told us that Steven's suicide was our fault. She said that by giving him special treatment and not stopping when he asked us to, we had driven him to this. "You should have listened to him," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You should have let him be who he wanted to be. You failed as parents, and I don't know if I can forgive you for that." Hearing our daughter say these words felt like a dagger to the heart. James, who had been quiet during the conversation, finally spoke up. He echoed Kate's sentiments, saying that we should at least acknowledge our mistake. He believed that by forcing Steven into a mold we thought was best, we had only pushed him further into despair. The argument that followed was heated. Kate was furious, her eyes flashing with a mix of grief and anger. She packed her things hastily, her movements sharp and decisive. She had planned to stay for New Year's, a time we had hoped would bring some healing to our fractured family. But now, she was leaving, and she might not come back. "If you want to keep a relationship with me, you need to admit what you did wrong," Kate said as she stood by the door, her suitcase in hand. "You need to learn from this. Otherwise, I don't want people like you as parents." Her words lingered in the air long after she left. My husband and I were left standing in the living room, the silence around us thick and oppressive. We had always believed we were doing the right thing for Steven, providing him with the support and care he needed. But now, in the face of his death and our children's accusations, everything we had believed was thrown into question. We tried to defend our actions, saying that society's standards and expectations were to blame, that Steven's own refusal to accept help had played a role. But deep down, the doubt gnawed at us. Had we been too rigid, too insistent on what we thought was best? Had we failed to see Steven's needs and desires for what they truly were? The loss of Steven was a wound that would never heal, but now it seemed we were also losing Kate and possibly James. The house felt emptier than ever, filled with echoes of what once was. We were left to grapple with our grief and the heavy burden of potential mistakes. We were devastated, torn between our conviction and the painful reality that we might have driven our son to his death. Update: tomorrow would have been the 21st birthday of our son, Steven, who took his life almost a year ago. The approaching date looms over us, casting a shadow that we can't escape. We've tried to distract ourselves, burying our sorrow in mundane tasks and half-hearted attempts at normalcy. But with Steven's birthday so close, he is all we can think about. The memories flood back, each one a reminder of the son we lost and the children who have abandoned us. Steven never liked celebrating his birthday. He saw it as a marker of time passing, a reminder that yet another year had gone by without things getting better. For us, his birthday was always a bittersweet day, a time to celebrate his life while grappling with the reality of his struggles. Now, it is a day filled with an aching void, a stark reminder of what we have lost. We miss him so much that it feels like a physical pain, a wound that refuses to heal. Our daughter, Kate, completely stopped talking to us about 10 months ago. The last words she spoke to us were filled with anger and blame. According to her, we are responsible for Steven's suicide. She believes that our insistence on special treatment and our refusal to see things from Steven's perspective drove him to take his own life. It was about 1.5 months after Steven's death that she cut off all contact with us, unable to forgive what she saw as our unforgivable mistake. At the time of his suicide, Steven had already been out of contact with us for over a year. He had left, cutting ties and seeking a life where he wasn't defined by his diagnosis. Kate's anger is palpable, and while we tried to reach out to her, our efforts were in vain. She doesn't respond to our messages, and any attempt to visit her has been fruitless. Her brother, James, still talks to her regularly, but even he refuses to help bridge the gap. He believes that Kate has every right to distance herself from us and shares her belief that our actions contributed to Steven's death. James's stance only deepens our sense of isolation. He tells us that Kate doesn't have to talk to us if she doesn't want to, reinforcing the idea that we are to blame. The loss of Steven and the estrangement from our remaining children feels like a punishment without end. We reach out to Kate on social media, hoping for a response, a sign that she might still care, but our messages go unanswered, lost in the void of her silence. We knew where she lived until recently. We visited her old apartment, hoping for a chance to speak with her face to face, but she was never home. According to James, she moved to New York City this past September to enroll in a PhD program. Now we don't even know where she lives. The distance between us is no longer just emotional, but physical as well. The house feels empty, the silence a constant reminder of the family we once had. We are left with our grief and our memories, clinging to the hope that one day, Kate might find it in her heart to forgive us, that James might see that we were trying to do what we thought was best. Until then, we are adrift in our sorrow, missing Steven, and yearning for the children who have turned away from us. Update. My husband has had a drinking problem for somewhat over 2 years now. His drink of choice is usually vodka, but he occasionally switches to wine. On weekdays, he consumes 2 to 5 shots of vodka, but on weekends, his intake can skyrocket to an entire bottle. When he drinks wine, it's even more excessive. He'll drink an entire bottle during the week, often escalating to 2 bottles on weekends. When he's drunk, he becomes extremely angry. Though he doesn't get physically aggressive, his yelling and screaming fill the house with a palpable tension. Our interactions have dwindled to the occasional few hours on a weekend when he's momentarily sober, but even that time is marred by the looming threat of his next drink. He begins drinking as soon as he gets home on workdays and often starts around noon on weekends, leaving little room for meaningful connection. His drinking problem ebbs and flows. With my help, he has managed to regain control multiple times. During these periods, although he still drinks almost every day, it's usually not enough to get him drunk, but inevitably, things deteriorate again. The cycle of hope and despair is exhausting. Each time he falls back into heavy drinking, it feels like I lose a little more of him. The roots of his drinking problem trace back to about 2 years ago. It started when our youngest son, Steven, applied to university without our knowledge, and then cut off all contact once he left for school. The betrayal and anger my husband felt over Steven's actions were profound. The son he had tried so hard to help and protect had chosen to sever ties. The sense of failure and loss drove my husband to seek solace in alcohol. Before this, he was a moderate drinker. He would have a drink only on special occasions like holidays, parties, and date nights, and even then, he almost never had enough to get drunk. But now, the man I married seems to be slipping away. His drinking has created a chasm between us, one that grows wider with each passing day. The moments when he's not drinking are overshadowed by the tension and the inevitable descent into another bout of heavy drinking. The house, once filled with laughter and conversation, now echoes with his angry outbursts and my silent despair. I feel like I've lost him since his drinking problem began, at least during the waves when it's really bad. He is drunk most of the time, and then all he does is just scream around. The person he becomes under the influence is a stranger to me, angry, bitter, and unreachable. We are slowly drifting apart, and I fear that if things don't change, the gap between us will become insurmountable. Our once strong bond is fraying, and the love that held us together is being eroded by the relentless tide of his alcoholism. I long for the days when we were a team, facing life's challenges together. Now, it feels like I am battling this alone, trying to hold on to the remnants of our relationship while he drowns his pain in alcohol. I don't know how to reach him anymore, and with each passing day, the hope that we can find our way back to each other diminishes. The weight of Steven's absence and the strain of my husband's drinking problem are pulling us under, and I don't know if we have the strength to resurface. Reflecting on everything that has happened, there are some hard lessons we've learned through this painful journey. The importance of truly listening to our loved ones. I remember countless conversations with Steven where he pleaded with us to stop the special treatment. He insisted that he didn't want it, that he just wanted to be treated like everyone else. But we, believing we knew what was best, kept pushing. We thought we were helping him, but in reality, we were only pushing him further away. Steven's eyes would fill with frustration every time we brought up therapy or special accommodations. I don't need this, he would say, his voice tinged with desperation. But we couldn't see past our own beliefs, convinced that we were doing the right thing. It was only after his passing that we truly understood the weight of our actions. Sometimes, listening and respecting the wishes of those we care about can be more beneficial than imposing our own beliefs. Steven needed us to hear him, to understand his desire for normalcy, but our insistence on what we thought was best created a rift that ultimately became insurmountable. Had we listened more and tried to see things from Steven's perspective, perhaps things might have turned out differently.